How's everybody doing? My audience today is quite intimidating. So, we'll do it without the presentation. So I'm a 7th grade teacher, and 7th grade teachers are some of the most corny people in the world. Clap your hands once if you're excited to be here today. Clap your hands twice if you're excited to be here today. Clap your hands 3 times if you've ever assigned a performance task that blends narrative and argumentative writing. So I was going to have a wonderful picture of my classroom on the screen, but one thing that brought me to this realization of teaching argument and narrative together happened last September, in September of 2013. And it was in September, and I was introducing my students to argument. And in George Hillicks's book, Writing Argument, he explains of a gateway activity in introducing argument to students, and it involves looking at picture mysteries. And has anyone seen this? And looking at the clues in the picture mystery at the crime scene and trying to make a claim, give evidence, and warrants as to what happened. And that is like kind of an entryway into argument that students find incredibly engaging. My co-teacher and I decided to up the rigor and have the students write a crime report, putting themselves in the perspective of the detective and explaining what they saw at the crime scene. Now, the result that occurred was incredible. All of a sudden, students were using much more descriptive language. Students were invested in their work in a way that we had never really seen before. And then it kind of clicked with us, wow, maybe there's a power in teaching argument with storytelling. And so that kind of brings me to my claim today, that the two should be taught simultaneously. There are a lot of books out there about best practices of teaching instruction, but they tend to be very divided. They tend to either be about argument or about narrative. And I want to see if today what we can think about is, are there ways that we can kind of marry the two? I have 2 goals today. The first is to justify this necessity, and the second is to provide performance task ideas for you to kind of get your creative juices flowing as to how we can accomplish this goal. So the 4 reasons why I believe that these 2 forms of rhetoric can be taught together it's 4-fold. First, it's authentic. And these are in the notes. Second, it's empowering. Third, mutually enriching. And fourth, engaging. So as I go through the 4 reasons, I'm going to give a few ideas as to how we can accomplish this with performance tasks. The first is authentic. And when we teach argument and narrative separately, it doesn't mimic real life. In real life, people are using those 2 rhetorical modes simultaneously. Think speeches, giving anecdotes, and kind of empathizing with the audience. Think commercials. One commercial that I remember from the 90s is the Mentos commercial, where there'd be a problem, and then they eat Mentos, and then it would be all better. So that's like incorporating narrative into their pitch. So I have a quote here from Kelly Gallagher in his book, and he says, if we want our students to understand the value writing can play in their lives, maybe we should consider shifting instruction away from strict adherence to traditional discourses and begin having our students explore the reasons why writers write. And I think once we begin blending these 2 rhetorical modes, students begin being forced to consider, why am I telling a story right now? Why am I making an argument right now? At what point are certain ways of communicating more effective than others? One performance task that actually we're going to do at the end of this unit, that I'm in right now, individuality and conformity with my students. We're going to be having them do a marketing pitch. And I'll just kind of read through the notes here as to how that's going to kind of go down. First, students are going to be grouped into teams of 3 to 5 students. Each team receives or invents an item that connects to the unit theme. 3, each team is challenged to market their product to their classmates, so that would be their audience. 4, students work together to create commercials and skits that demonstrate the value of their product. The students will practice actually writing counterclaims authentically, right, by explaining why their product might be preferable over competing products. So we always talk about counterclaim, and 7th graders are like, huh? Why would I talk about somebody else's opinion? I'm talking about myself, right? And this is kind of an authentic way of introducing that. They see this in commercials, and then they can begin to understand, oh, this is why. And 5th, audience members, right, to keep them accountable. I've got to keep them accountable as they're watching. They role play as investors. And what they're thinking is, how is the narrative that I'm watching persuading me? And is it effective? And then they choose, and we're thinking about having it almost be like a Shark Tank scenario. Has anyone seen Shark Tank? Where they decide whether or not to invest in the product that's being pitched. Okay, so there is a sense of narrative in the skit, but also argument in trying to sell the product. The second reason why I believe that narrative and argument should be taught together is because it's empowering. And one of the most mind-blowing things I've read in the past year or so is this quote under 2A. And it's by Chris Gallagher and Amy Lee in their book, Writing Performance Tasks, I think. Too often in school, students are asked to write only about text. This kind of work, however cognitively complex, reinforces in students the notion that they are somehow outside the world of discourse, positioned to comment on it, but not participate in it. If we have students writing narrative, and then in some way arguing with it, they identify as the author. That is a much more empowering position to be in, critically, and just as far as self-efficacy goes. I was thinking with the whole Hillick's mystery gateway into argument, how can we kind of up that and then have students kind of responding to each other? And what we did in September is we had students write their own mysteries. Now, I need to scaffold this a lot for my 7th graders, and I have a wide range of reading and writing abilities. I teach students who are at the 2nd grade reading level, all the way up to 9th grade reading level. I'm sure some people here are the same way. And so I will, by the way, my email, you can email me and I'll send you the PowerPoint. There's a lot more visuals. However, what I provided to most of my students was the first half of a mystery story that I wrote, very cheesy. And then they were challenged to end it. And we gave them 3 suspects that they could end it with. So it was very kind of controlled in that way. And each suspect had kind of key characteristics about themselves that they could place evidence in their narrative to kind of hint towards that person. So that's the narrative writing part. Now, where it becomes empowering is that the students then exchange their narratives with each other. And then they try to see if they could figure out their partner's mystery. And then their partner could give them feedback, being the author, saying, no, like that's not what I was going for. Or, you missed this detail, you need to read more carefully. Or, yes, you're warranting that evidence, you're close, but you need to include this information as well. So the students writing the argument and responding and answering the mysteries can talk with the author sitting right next to them, right? And they can give themselves that really meaningful feedback. So that kind of connects to 2B, where it says students should have opportunities to have meaningful critical interactions with material that they have created. Students must identify as authors and be prepared to use argumentative writing to respond to each other's work. The third reason why we want to kind of blend these two rhetorical modes is that they're mutually enriching. Narratives can strengthen arguments, and arguments can inspire and propel narratives. B, C, and D are not fully fleshed out performance tasks, but they kind of go into how this could possibly be the case, how writing narratives could really enrich an argument, and how writing arguments could enrich a narrative. So B, personal anecdotes, like I mentioned before, can be incorporated into arguments and make them more persuasive. Students can write presidential election speeches that utilize narratives to appeal to their constituents. C, fictional characters often have opinions and or philosophies that inform their actions. So to give you an example, a few weeks ago we read Harrison Bergeron, Kurt Vonnegut, and in that story, it takes place in the future, 2081, and there is this kind of debate as to how do we define equality, and should everyone be completely equal? And for those of you who haven't read it, what the government decides is that everyone must be completely equal. No one can be any better or worse than the other. And if you are more talented than someone else, for example, more smart, or more intelligent, smarter, you have a handicap in your ear, right, that buzzes into your ear so you can't be as intelligent. And that is their definition of equality, this kind of superficial understanding of equality. Now, the main character, the protagonist, Harrison, kind of pushes back against this and decides to rebel. And then the conflict of the story kind of comes from a difference in understanding of definition or an argument. And once students begin to understand that different characters, their actions are driven by different worldviews and different arguments, they can understand the text better. And then they can begin to write their own texts by starting with the fact that there's going to be some sort of disagreement, some sort of argument, some sort of two people thinking past each other, two people having different goals, right? And then that can be kind of the basis of narrative writing. Third, narratives such as fables use storytelling to make moral arguments. So you do have narratives that, real world narratives that are making arguments, and then as a writing prompt, you might be able to flip it and start with the moral, start with the ethic or the argument, and see if they can write a narrative that in some way expresses that. And that can be very authentic and connect to your unit theme, especially if, like, for example, Unit 2 for us is individuality versus conformity. They can begin writing narratives that in some way play on that theme and demonstrate their understanding of that theme. Last, engaging. My students get bored very easily. And so when you are engaging them critically and creatively, they're kind of going full throttle in the classroom. When they're having these discussions, when they're expressing themselves, when they're thinking, when they're writing with their brain and their heart, they're writing better. They're more engaged. The students develop a more intimate connection with their writing and the writing process. They begin to understand themselves as authors. And last, they recognize that argument and narrative are authentic forms of self-expression.